muss die Kamera aber ganz schnell runter machen, ja? Mhm.
Have you guys ever had an irrational fear? How about the fear of the dark? Yes. It's not even anything. It's like, so I don't know, anyone have a basement in their house or ever been in a basement? What's the worst thing that can possibly happen when you're in the basement? Okay, I didn't think about a raccoon. That might be it. What I was thinking of was that the lights turn off. Right? And you guys have siblings. In my basement, in my parents' house, it was an unfinished basement. It was nice. We would play down there. We'd set up skateboard jumps in the winter when it was cold outside. We'd play down there for hours and hours and hours. Completely fine. Then we go to leave, and there would be this mad race because whoever got to the top first would shut off the lights. And the people that are below, they have to get up the stairs while the lights are off. And you guys have probably experienced this, maybe, right? Where the worst, most terrifying feeling is when you're at the bottom of the basement stairs. You see that light up there, and then the darkness surrounds you as the lights are turned off. And you just got to get up those stairs as fast as you possibly can, right? Because the second the lights turn off, any manner of things can be in there. Like there could be a giant killer octopus in your basement just waiting for you. It's been there the whole time, hiding under that old mattress in the back. And the second the lights are off, it's like, this is my chance. I'm going to get that kid. I've been waiting so long, the lights have been on, I couldn't get him. Or you're just afraid you're going to stub your toe. Or you're afraid, we used to, as we got older, it's kind of fun how you start playing with your fears then. Right? It's fun to challenge the things that you're afraid of. So all of a sudden, instead of just playing tag in the basement, we would play tag with all the lights off. And we would block up all the windows. So it's literally, like when we say it's pitch black, you can't see anything. And then we would just run around and try to tag each other by sound and just bump into things. And one time my brother just ran straight into a wall, like the cement wall. And maybe you guys have an unfinished basement, but there was rebar sticking out of our wall. And so he just hit his head right on the rebar and cut up his whole head. We were like, this is awesome. Best game of tag ever. And maybe you guys don't have a basement, but you've been outside when it's dark, right? You can be hiking a trail and it's gorgeous. The birds are chirping. The bluebirds are there. You're like, this is great. I just feel so one with nature. And then the lights turn off and it's dark outside and you are terrified. There's these sounds, there's coyotes just surrounding you and you're gonna die. And we used to be so scared of the backwoods in my house at night. And then when we got older, we would do the same thing that we used to do in the basement, but we would go out at night and we would blindfold ourselves in the middle of the woods, spin around, and then just wander and see what we would hit. You guys ever do that? New Hampshire! Yeah, so that was what we did for fun. But the worst thing you'd be terrified the whole time because you're like, what's going to happen? I know there's bears out here. I know there's coyotes and squirrels. So anything could happen. And the worst thing that ever happened was you got whacked in the face with a branch or you fell into a swamp. You generally turned out okay and you kind of face these fears. But what happens if we only stayed in the areas where we had light? we wouldn't make a lot of progress, right? Because I don't know about you. I mean, well, I carry around a flashlight all the time, but most people don't. So if you only went where there was only light, then you'd be pretty limited in your options. And I think a lot of times we as people, when we look at the world around us, it seems really dark because we can only see so far ahead. And so we're looking into the future and we're looking at what could happen in our lives, and we're just scared because we don't know what's going to happen, right? And sometimes the temptation is just kind of like sit there where you know what things are and you kind of have a little flashlight and you're shining it up at the ceiling in your room and you're like, I'm really comfortable right here because I can see everything. But I have no idea what's through that door or that door, and there's something really creepy outside the window, so I'm not even going to look. And you're just sitting there, and then eventually the batteries on your flashlight burn out, and you're forced to make some decisions in life, whether you just stay there where you know, hopefully nothing comes and gets me, or you make a bold move, and you start moving forward into the darkness, into the things that you're afraid of, and start tackling them head on. And so what happens when we don't do this, when we don't tackle those fears that we have, is we end up kind of stunting our own personal development. And especially if this is something you're looking at your relationship with Jesus, you stunt your spiritual development where you're not able to really move forward in your faith because you only stick with the things that are comfortable. And if you only stick with the things that are comfortable, then you're never going to be able to move forward. So we're going to look at a story right now. It's not in the little Bibles underneath your seat. So if you have a smartphone, you can follow along. We're going to go to 2 Kings 13. We're going to read through this all, and then we'll go back and break it down. Normally, I kind of read through it sequentially, but today you're in for a treat. So we got a lot to talk about, too. I haven't preached in almost a month, so I got a lot of pent-up preaching energy, so we'll see what happens. So let's read from 2 Kings 13, starting at verse 14, if you're following along. All right, you guys got it? You read it? All right, okay. Now when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die, Joash, king of Israel, went down to him and wept before him, crying, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And Elisha said to him, take a bow and arrows. So he took a bow and arrows. Then he said to the king of Israel, draw the bow, and he drew it. And Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands, and he said, open the window eastward, and he opened it. Then Elisha said, shoot, and he shot. And he said, the Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Syria, for you shall fight the Syrians in Aphek until you have made an end of them. And he said, take the arrows, and he took them. And he said to the king of Israel, strike the ground with them. And he struck 3 times and stopped. Then the man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck down Syria until you had made an end of it. But now you will strike down Syria only 3 times. So we just read that. You have no idea what happened. You guys want to know what happened in that story and how it applies to our lives? Anyone? Okay, cool. So let's first off, there's 2 people. Does anyone remember the 2 people that we saw in this story that had names? Elisha, Joash, a.k.a. the king of Israel. So let's just do a brief comparison of Elisha versus Joash, so we have an understanding of, where is this? Where was this written in history? What's happening? What's going on? So first off, this is from a portion of the Bible we refer to as the Old Testament, and a book of Kings. It's going through and just listing each of the kings of Israel, what they did in their lives, notable events. And so this is a particularly notable event that happened in the life of King Joash. So we have this interaction between the king of Israel and Elisha. So let's look at Elisha first and get an understanding of who he is and what his significance is in this story. So Elisha is what we refer to as a prophet. So back several thousand years ago, when God would communicate with people on earth, he would usually have kind of one chosen person that he would put his Holy Spirit on and communicate people through that. Sometimes these people volunteered. Sometimes God just showed up and said, hey, guess what? Your life is going to be completely different from how you expected, and you have no choice in the matter. So Elisha is one of those people that just got randomly selected. He got drafted. So before him was a prophet named Elijah. And Elisha, we get that he was a farmer because he was out in his fields. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, so like 12 pairs of oxen, or 12 yokes worth of oxen. A yoke was the thing that was on the oxen, pulled the cart. So anyway, he's out there plowing. And Elijah, who is another prophet, I know, Elijah, Elisha, couldn't they have differentiated the names a little bit? Like, why does it have to be so similar? I was considering calling one of them Bob, but I mean, you just got to learn what they are. So Elijah is walking down the road. He sees Elisha out in the field. He just runs up to him, throws his robe over him, like, you're out working, and some guy just throws his jacket on you. Weird. And so Elisha says, okay, cool, I'll follow you. So he starts following him, follows him for 7 years. And then Elijah eventually gets old. He gets old, and that everyone can kind of tell something's going to happen. You know, when you get old, most people die, right? That's what eventually happens. Everyone kind of had this vibe that Elijah was special, and that's just not going to happen. He's not going to die. And so Elisha is following him quickly. Everyone around him, all his friends are like, you know that Elijah is going to be like taken from you today. He's like, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. And so he's following him, and Elijah knows something's going to happen. He doesn't really even know, but he knows that something's going to go down. And so he turns to Elisha, who's been following him, and he says, hey, I'm about to leave. Do you want anything from me? You know, before I leave, like, here's my will. What do you want me to put in it? And so Elisha asks Elijah that he'll basically be double the prophet that he ever was. He wants twice the spirit that was Elijah on himself. So he's been following. He got nominated. He makes a conscious decision. He says, I want to have what you had times 2. That's pretty sweet. Like, right? It's like, what do you want to be? Your dad's asking you, like, or your guardian, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be you, but twice as good. Like, you know, it works. So he ends up getting this request. Elijah says, if you see me when I'm taken, you'll get it. So Elijah and Elisha are walking. They cross the river Jordan in a pretty miraculous way. They're walking, and Elijah this chariot from the sky just swoops down, takes him off, and Elisha says these words, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. He's like, whoop, there goes everything that I've ever known. There goes all the power and the strength. And he's got this crucible moment where he's either going to pick up and walk in the faith that he has somehow, like there's no magical moment that says you have inherited twice the power. But he's got this testing moment almost immediately where, you know, I said they crossed the river Jordan in a pretty miraculous way. Basically, Elijah walked up to it, whacked it with his coat, and it just parted, and they walked across. Pretty cool, right? I wish I could do that. And so Elisha sees Elijah getting taken up. He grabs his coat. He whacks the river, kind of like, all right, let's go. He whacks it. It parts too. He's like, it's on, baby. Like, I am a prophet now. Like, get ready for it. And he just has this incredible life. He raises people from the dead. He gets made fun of, and he calls bears out, and the bears eat the people. He gives people leprosy. People come to him. He takes the leprosy away. He's just walking in God's power. It's just incredible. It's ridiculous, this life that he has. And when we pick up at the beginning of this story, he's dying because he's sick. So Elijah, chariots of fire, incredible moment. Elisha is on his deathbed because he got the flu. Not quite as crazy as you might think, but you know, sometimes that's how life works. And so then Joash, and we learn that he's the king of Israel, which sounds really cool, right? You know, the king. Being the king is cool. Except that for him, it was probably the worst thing you could possibly be at the moment. So he grew up, his dad was a king, he inherited the kingdom. And the kingdom he inherited was in an absolute mess. So his dad left him with about 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 soldiers, which in that day was nothing. So he's got no army. And then to top that off, because he has no army, all of his enemies are saying, hey, let's just take your stuff. So they keep coming in and invading and kind of conquering the land. There's all his borderlands have been taken over by Syria. They keep coming in. There's raiders that come in every spring and take stuff from them. And he's just helpless to do anything about it. And not only is he in that bad of a situation, but he's in the middle of a civil war. So he's got bad guys on every side chasing him. And then his own countrymen have split, and now there's Israel and Judah. And during his lifetime, the king of Judah challenges him to a duel. He ends up beating him, but it's just this terrible civil war that's going on. So he is in desperate straits. And so he does what a lot of people do when they are in desperate straits, is they turn to God. We learn earlier when reading that he is not following God at all, completely disinterested, doesn't want anything to do with him. And so he's now in a period of desperation where he's got nothing. And as many of us do when we have nothing and all of our plans are not working out, we say, I'll give God a try. I'll show up at church. And so what God immediately does is he strikes him with lightning. No, guys, that's not what happened. Like, a lot of times we have this impression that if you wait till the last minute or something to go to God, that he's like, no, you waited too long, you're disqualified. Like, but in reality, he might have been orchestrating your whole life to get you into this place where you're finally willing to come to him. And now you're ready to come to God, realizing what you truly have to offer, which is nothing. And so he comes to the king, Joash comes to the king, and he's got nothing. Or Joash comes to Elisha. See, all these names, I should have changed them to Bob. Joash comes to Elijah, and he says the exact same words to Elisha that Elisha said to Elijah. So if we get back into this, we're going to kind of walk through this and see what happens. And I have an illustration to kind of help us understand this. So now when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die, Joash, king of Israel, went to him and wept before him, crying, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. So this, I planned a lot of this message, and then I didn't even realize the connection between what he's saying right here to Elisha is the exact same thing as Elisha said to Elijah, which kind of blew my mind when I was studying this, and it changed my whole perspective on this. Because I'm like, what is he expecting? What is he coming to this man of God expecting? Is he just desperate because he knows Elijah is dying, and all of a sudden he realized, man, I don't even have an army, and now my one connection with God is disappearing? Or is he hoping that Elisha will have this word of encouragement for him and be like, don't worry, you're doing a great job. I know everything's going wrong, but it's going to be okay. Or is he coming and hoping that, maybe he's heard the stories about what Elisha and Elijah did in their last interaction. And he's saying, I want to take up that mantle. Like, you're dying, pass it off to me. I want to be the next leader of Israel. This seems like potentially this could be what he's asking. He's coming to God and he's saying, what can I do? What do you want me to do? Like, I have nothing to offer. I'm completely destitute. I'm trying to lead. You've given me these giftings. I want to be the best king that I possibly can, but I don't know how to do it. Give me your strength. Give me your strength. And so Elijah, based upon his response, says, all right, take a bow and arrows. Okay. Why? This is like, we read these stories and we're like, okay, yeah, that's normal. Obviously, like, let's do some target practice. Like, you come to me, I'm dying. Like, this is like if you went to your grandparents' like deathbed and they're dying, and it's like, Grandpa, what should I do with my life? And he says, well, son, get your BB gun. You're like, what, Grandpa? Like, Grandpa, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And so the king, he's like, okay, I'll do it. So I just happen to have a bow and arrow over here. So just grab this bow and arrows, which I just happen to have conveniently located right there. So this is a bow and arrows. They're two separate things. A lot of times, I don't know, as kids we grow up saying, the bow and arrow, like it's one thing, but it's two separate entities. Right, so this is a hunting bow that is not mine, and I'm holding it upside down to demonstrate how much it is not mine. Right, so this is a 75-pound test weight, which means that I'm not going to pull it all the way back when we do this because it would go through the target that I'm going to set up. So if you want to do some serious damage on a deer or like, a pesky squirrel, let's get into your bird feeder. this is a great way to do it without drawing attention from the cops. Unless you're like out there in your underwear, like midday, doing this on a public street. But if you live in a semi-rural area, you might be able to pull it off. So usually with a bow and arrow, you have a target. So I'm just going to put this over here. Now, just so you know, I did practice one time before. So one time. So we should be good. Right? So we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a minute. So he says to him, take a bow and arrows. So he took a bow and arrows. So he grabs a bow. This has a little like wrist strap. It's so complicated. Can I get a volunteer from the audience? No, just kidding. Yeah, I promised I wouldn't do that. All right, so he's got the bow and arrows. He takes them. People are leaving. This is great. All right, so he takes the bow and arrows, and then he said to the king of Israel, draw the bow. So, yeah, feel free to pray. So he draws it, and Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands. So I'm going to, wait, this will happen a couple times, so just get your cameras ready for later. There will be a photo opportunity at the end. All right, so at this point, I always kind of thought of this as they're in a castle. When I don't know, when I was reading this as a kid, I always pictured this in like a medieval stone castle in a tower. And I was reading this, and I thought that it's completely not where they are right now, because they're in the Middle East, and he's probably in a mud hut. Like, that's where he is. There was no medieval castles, like, with stone towers and dragons. They're just in a mud hut somewhere. And at this point, the windows are closed, like the guy's dying, like it's a dark room. So he just pulled his bow back. He's ready to go, aiming at a wall. And so I think sometimes with our lives and God's, it's really complicated because we come to him and we say, God, what do you want us to do? And he just says, suit up, let's go. And you're like, okay, where? Fortunately, Elisha doesn't let him worry too long. And as we continue in the passage, we see that he says to open the window eastward. So let's pretend there's a window here, right where this target conveniently located is. I'm going to open it. I had to release the thing that I was holding on to, open the window. And then Elisha said, shoot. And he shot. Anyone else scared? Yes, I got it in the blue. That's right. All right, he shot. And so he's confused. What the heck just happened? Fortunately for him, Elisha immediately tells him what he's doing. He had to do what he was doing first, and then he immediately tells him what his purpose is, what's going on, why am I here? And he says, the Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Syria, for you shall fight the Syrians at Aphek until you have made an end of them. This is awesome. Because God specifically, he comes to God. He's like, what do I do? He's like, well, here's the deal. You're going to go fight Syria in this town until you make an end of them. Like, that's very specific directions. And Syria at the time was located in the east, so it's kind of like he's declaring war with his arrow. It's pretty sweet when you think about it. And sometimes when you start following God, God immediately tells you what you need to do. It's like this light bulb goes off. You raise your hand, you start praying, you're like, Jesus, I'm open, tell me what you want to do. He's like, I know what you want to do. And like the next Tuesday, you're like in the supermarket, it's like, you need to go pray for that lady. She's got this and that. And you need to you're like, what the heck am I doing? And it's like these crazy words, and you just know exactly what's going on in your friends' lives. And you just have the right words to say. And God's like, you need to go start doing this over here. You need to start a small group over here. And he's just leading you and directing you and telling you exactly what you need to do. And it's fantastic when that happens. Let me tell you, when you are just tight with God and he is just telling you your next move, and it's like you get out of bed, you pray, you're like, God, what am I supposed to do today? It's like, boom, we need to go there. And just the connections are made. It's awesome. It's incredible. Many of you guys have probably experienced that. Maybe you never have. But the worst Man, the reason I really don't like this story and why I struggle with it so much and why I wanted to preach on it, usually the stuff I'm preaching on is the stuff that I'm struggling with the most personally because it really gives me an opportunity to study it in depth. So what happens here then is then he said, take the arrows, and he took them, and he said to the king of Israel, strike the ground with them, and he struck 3 times and stopped. So he's up there, he just shot 1 arrow, and Elisha says, just keep shooting, bro. So he's like, okay, all right. Just point it at Syria still, right? Just right toward, man, how do people do this? It's hard enough just loading it. All right, here we go. Here we go, Elisha. This is for you. Yes. Yes. Nice. All right. That was a lot of work. All right. It's complicated. Oh, tough to get on there. All right. All right. Here's number. Sweet. You guys, look at that clumping. That is very good. If I could just get it down like 8 inches, be perfect. All right, so here I go. I'm still going, Elisha. I'm still over here, still shooting. You didn't really tell me when to stop. Oh, yeah, bullseye. I'm going to stop. I got a bullseye. Thank you, Elisha. That was great. 3 arrows. That was fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you. I'm good. I'm going to stop right now. I stuck 3 times, and he stopped because he got tired. He's like, it's a lot of work. I'm not even pulling this all the way back. I did it before. My shoulder was hurting. I'm like, how do you do this? This is dumb. So he stops. He's probably tired. And Elisha's response just is maddening to me because it speaks so much into my life. And I think for you guys too, maybe you'll relate to this. But he says to him, well, first off, it says he gets angry. It says, then the man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck 5 or 6 times, then you would have struck down Syria until you had made an end of it. But now you will strike down Syria only 3 times. So Elisha died, and they buried him. What a what? Okay, I don't know about you guys, but any of you guys go to school or been to school, gone to school? The most frustrating assignment you could possibly get is an open-ended assignment, right? Like, give me math problems all day because I know at the end I got it wrong, I got it right, yes, no, yes, no. But, hey, how about you write an essay comparing George Washington to Lady Gaga? Oh, my God. And have that, turn it in when you're ready. What? Like, what, is this a 5-paragraph essay? Or is this am I supposed to write a book? And what part of their lives am I supposed to look at? What's the context? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Wait, George Washington, founder of our country, Lady Gaga, born this way. Like, what, I'm not getting a connection. Maybe because George Washington he was born the country, and Lady Gaga was born with flaming parts of her anatomy. Like, I don't understand. Like, they both use gunpowder. Like, there's no comparison. How am I supposed to do this? How long do I write? When is it even due? Like, I hated open-ended projects on stuff that I didn't care about. Like, sometimes you get one where it's like, write an essay as long as you want on, like, yourself. You're like, oh, I'll nail this. Like, I'm writing my autobiography right here. But, other times you're like, what the heck is going on? And I think with God, so many times we come to him and we say, God, I'll do anything you want. Just tell me what to do. And he says, all right, go do this. And you're like, yes, doing it. You're like, just keep running. You're like, I'm going to run. God, I'm running for you. Just running. Okay, God, it's been like 2 minutes. How much longer should I run? Hey, you still there? Okay, it's been like 3 minutes now. God, hey God, where am I going? You just said to run? Okay, God, I'm in front of like 50 teenagers and it's getting awkward. Okay. Okay, just keep going. hey, you know what, God? There's a McDonald's over there. I'm going to go over there. And we start following, and he tells us to do something, and then we don't hear anything from him, and we're like, well, God's not telling me what to do anymore. Bail. Sometimes maybe you felt from a young age, you're like, man, God wants me to save my purity for marriage. Like, I'm not going to have sex before I'm married. I'm not going to mess around. And you're like, this was great when you're in high school, and you're like, I'm not going to date. And then you're in college, and you're like, I date now. And then there's no one that wants to date you. You're like, okay. And then it's like later, and you're like, you're 25, 30 years old, and you're like, God, hey, I said I would wait for marriage, but I thought I'd be married when I was 19. Like, you're not coming through on your part of the bargain. Like, what the heck? You're like, screw this, I'm doing my own thing. Or maybe even on a non-spiritual level, like you're looking at the future, and you're looking at like college or something, and you're like, what college am I supposed to go to? God, tell me which college I'm supposed to go to. Tell me, please. Just write it down in my book so I know. And then write like my reference letter. And then just fill out my application, God. Just do it. Like, I just want to follow you. And like, no, you're just copping out. You want him to tell you exactly everything to do with your life. It's like, just apply to a bunch of colleges that you like and see which ones you get into and go from there. Like, I remember I was struggling over this so much. I applied to like 7 schools, and I ended up getting into all of them. And I was like, what the heck? Like, God, you couldn't narrow it down a little bit for me? Like, I have no idea how to even like put on my own pants, let alone choose a college. Like, I don't even know how to do laundry. And so I'm like whittling it down. I'm like killing myself. And my dad's like, whatever one you go to, it's probably going to be fine. I'm like, oh yeah. I'll probably be okay. Like, I'm going to make it. Like, I'll get an education, and then I'll get a job. Like, it's okay. Or maybe you're the opposite, where you send out all these application letters, and you keep getting rejection. And you're like, hey, God, what the heck? Like, what's going on? Like, I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to follow you. I'm trying to do this. Or you're saying, you're like, I'm going to date. I heard that you should only date Christians, and then it'll be easy. Because you both like want to save yourself till marriage, and then you realize, well, like, oh my gosh, I have hormones, and like, I'm attracted to this person, and we just totally made out in our parents' Corolla. Like, what the, like, I thought it was going to be easy if I was doing it your way, and now here I am in a park making out in a Corolla. Like, what's going on, like, with my life? Why is it so hard sometimes to keep following and doing what we're supposed to be doing when it's open-ended? And I think this is something I've been talking about with my parents, with my brothers, with pretty much everyone. It's kind of this realization that sometimes when you first come to Christ, it's like your relationship with your parents when you were really little. They fed you everything. They gave you everything you needed. They dressed you. They're like, poop here, walk over here, told you everything you needed to do. And then as you get older, you get a little more freedom. And then eventually they kick you out of the house and say, what do you want to do? Like, bring glory to our family. Like, do something crazy. And sometimes with God, he spoon feeds us at the beginning. He tells us exactly where to go. And then as you grow in your maturity and your freedom in him, he says, hey, like, what do you want to do? Like, what's your burdens? This king obviously had some ideas of what he wanted God to do for him. He said, I want to be the best king that there is. And so he has this opportunity to do it, but he fails to follow through. And as a result, he doesn't get everything that God had for him. And for me, it's just like, Elisha, why wouldn't you just tell him to shoot 6 times? Is it that complicated? Like, why wouldn't you just tell him? And sometimes God just puts us in situations where we just got to keep running. And if you don't hear anything from God, it doesn't mean stop. It just means you're probably doing the right thing. Yeah, that was good. That was good. It's a good word right there. The word. Yeah, so if you're doing something and you don't hear anything from God and he told you to do it before, probably a pretty good chance you need to just keep doing it. And why is this? Why is this something that came to me, and then Pastor Tim pointed out that he preached almost this exact same point probably a year ago. And I was like, maybe that's where I got it, but you did a really good job preaching it because I remember it in my subconscious. But victory is in the follow-through. If he had followed through with something that didn't even seem related to what he was trying to do, then he would have seen victory in his country. Maybe Israel would have been restored. Maybe it would have changed the total dynamic of history. but instead he failed. And as a result, his son inherited a kingdom that was still messed up. His son inherited a kingdom that was still messed up. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure his son was murdered. The next guy was murdered. There's the strife, civil war. Eventually, they just get conquered and deported. That's not the way I want to end my book. You know, like when they're writing about you, it's like, Steve failed to meet God's potential for him, sucked. Like, no, I don't, that's not what I want on my eulogy. That's not what I want to be talking about. He had so much potential, man. And then he just got really scared and he just didn't do anything. Like, that's not, I don't want that to be my story. I don't think anyone wants that. How do we get to the point where we know that that's not going to be our story? So I have 3 things that we can do kind of in the context of looking at the arrow's role in the story, and how we can kind of be like that arrow and how we can apply that to our lives. So the first thing that arrows do is that they point. So Elijah gave him a target. He pointed his arrow to it. He released and he shot. If you're wondering, how do I live my life and accomplish the purposes that God has for me, you need to think about, what am I supposed to do? Now, this is not the same for everyone. The direction that we're all pointing, it should be number 1 at Jesus. But then from there, he's going to tell us to do different things as we walk through our lives. Some of you guys, your calling will be to be like the best mom that there ever was. Other of you guys are going to be in business, and maybe you'll be engineers, and you're going to do the best that you possibly can in your career to bring glory to God. Maybe some of you guys will be called and you'll work full-time in ministry, or you volunteer part-time and see an impact there. But you got to find some sort of target that where you're going. And I know you guys probably, especially if you're a senior right now, you're like, I've heard that I need to have a direction for my life. Like, I need to do one thing for the rest of my life. I got it. Well, here's the thing. You're not going to do the same thing for the rest of your life. Like, let's just get that out there. The odds of you, like, going to college for one job and then getting one job sitting at the same cube for the rest of your life are so small. Like, you would have to try so hard just to do that. Like, at my work, they're just like, you're going to this cube today. You're like, why? They're like, because you've been in this cube for a long time. It's just like, why? They're like, we're just changing things, like change. It's like, what the heck? Why am I was comfortable. I got a couch. And it's like, sometimes what you're doing in your life, where you point, is probably going to change. But if you're going to go anywhere, you got to figure out where you're going first. And maybe you point in a direction, it's the wrong direction. That's fine. At least you moved. You started going somewhere. The second thing that an arrow does is that it pierces. So once it finds its target and it's released, it sticks in there. Mr. White, who I borrowed these from, he was telling me that, that came out really easy. There goes that analogy. He was telling me he was practicing with one of these, and he shot it, and it went through the target and then went into a piece of wood, and then he broke the arrow, getting it out. It's right here. This arrow is broken because it went into the target so hard that in order to remove it, you had to physically break the arrow. When you're picking your target and you're going after it, go hard. Like, make a commitment to it that you're not gonna move from this thing that you're pursuing until something comes along and breaks you out of it. Like, that's how you can be effective. Like, you look at people that are crazy good at whatever they're doing. Like, the World Cup is going on right now. Do you think they just rolled out of bed at 20 years old and said, maybe I should play soccer with my life? No, once they were 2 years old, their parents were like, here, sit on this ball. It's like, you're not even potty trained yet. They're like, here's this ball. This is going to be your best friend for the rest of your life. And they pursued it, and they were stuck on it, and they just did everything that they could to pursue that ball, and it was like their best friend. So when you find something to point at, just stick into it and stay there. The third thing that arrows do is that they pursue. So an arrow, when you release it, it's moving towards something, moving towards its target. And so when you guys, sometimes there's a transitional point between when you find your target and when you pierce it, and when you claim it. And so for you need to just make sure that as you're going, that you stick and stay true to the path that you're walking on. Because if you guys have ever seen an arrow going through the air, what's keeping it on target? Momentum. That's really the only thing, that initial kick in the butt that I got. And if it hits a leaf, it hits a branch, if it hits something, it's going to get distracted. So the same way that victory is in the follow through, you need to pursue with what you're doing, whether this is something that you're trying to do for God, whether this is an academic goal that you have or a relationship that you want. There's an aspect of pursuing that creates victory. And so we looked at this story, and he failed miserably. And nobody wants to do that, right? I gave you a couple tips. But how does this relate to Jesus? So let's tie this into Jesus, right? Because this is where it gets fun. This is where it gets fun. Like everything in the Old Testament, all this stuff is supposed to point us towards Jesus. And so the amazing aspect of this story is that the guy that lived failed in what he was supposed to do, to accomplish his purpose, to reach his full potential of what God could have him done. And then Elisha, this prophet, he dies at the end of the story, right? It's like, well, he had a good run. He's done. But the amazing thing is, the only one that actually succeeds in this story is the dead guy moving forward from this point. You're like, okay, so what the heck are you talking about? So what happens? Now, bands of Moabites used to invade the land in the spring of the year. So not only do they have Syria coming in, they just got random people that are like, let's take their stuff. So they come in, and as a man was being buried, behold, a marauding band was seen, and the man was thrown into the grave of Elisha. So there's this funeral procession going on. They're all out there. It's sad. All of a sudden, they see a bunch of guys running at them with swords. They say, we could probably do this at another time. And so they're like, all right, where are we going to put the dead guy? And so they just throw him into a random grave that happens to be by, which happens to be the grave of Elisha. And as soon as the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. Elisha is still walking in his purpose after he's dead. How is he doing this? He's bones. Like, it's not like he was still there and he's just like, oh, like, here we go. Like, no, he's dead. It's just bones. What power accomplished this? Was this Elisha just being Elisha? Or was there something else going on? Elisha was able to do this because he was the arrow for the right archer. You could tweet that or something. He was the arrow for the right archer. So if you guys are an arrow and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, this arrow is not going to do anything on its own, right? Like, it's just there. You know, it's not going to move unless there's a really strong wind or something. It has to have an outside influence to move. You need an archer to pick up that arrow, say, I have purpose, I have vision, I have something I want you to do. To get that bow, a whole separate contraption, and line up the target and release it with expert precision in order for it to hit the bullseye. If you're just trying to do your thing as you want on your own, you're probably going to miss because you don't have the right power behind what you're trying to do. Elisha was able to succeed even after he was dead because he allowed Jesus to use him in his life. And what he did echoed on even through his legacy so that when his bones were touched, people came back to life. I want that to happen at my funeral. That someone comes to my funeral and I'm dead and I stay dead, but someone comes in, hears my story, and they are brought back to life. Like, that's what I want to be when I die. I don't want to die and miss my potential. I want to be someone that they mourn when they're gone because they know that there's so much power behind them. And so where did this power come from? Who is this perfect archer? Who's the one that's going to direct us where we need to go? And Jesus did all of these same things, the point, pierce, and pursue, but he did them for us. It says in, It says in Luke 9:51, when the day drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. Jesus knew what he was supposed to do. This is talking about before he was crucified. He had a purpose. He had a point, something he came to do, to accomplish, and he knew what it was, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get there. So he walked into Jerusalem, and he's willing to be pierced for us. It says in Isaiah 53, verse 5, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We don't have to go around trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. He has done what we could never have done on our own. And now it's just a matter of allowing him to use us in the freedom that comes for us. He was pierced. He was killed for us so that we could walk in the potential that we have, which is to know God fully. And so after that, he pursued. So not only did he just die and create a way, but he's pursuing every single one of you here tonight. And in Philippians 1:6, which is a letter to the church of Philippians, it says, "And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ." Jesus has begun a good work in you, and he has things that he wants you to do in this life. He wants you to know him. He wants you to walk in the fullness of life that comes from knowing him and walking in your purpose of traveling towards the right target, of being fixated and stuck on him. And he knows that, and he's willing to keep going and keep doing this for you. He is the good archer. So I want to ask you guys tonight, who is your archer? Who is directing your path? Is it your friends? Is it your parents? Is it your teachers, the people that are around you, that are influencing the direction of where you're going with your life? Who is your archer? Who is directing you on where to go? Who is setting the course for your life? And if it's not Jesus, you can have a great life. You can enjoy yourself. You can accomplish some great things, but you're going to miss out on the potential of what God had for you. And let me tell you, what he has is scary, it's unknown, but it's always better than what we think it's going to be. Like, I was so scared of taking this role as a youth director. And there's that temptation to say, no, that's totally out of my comfort zone. I've never done that before. I have grown so much in my walk with him in ways that I never would have done unless I had taken that initial risk and followed and said, yes, you direct me, you point me, you do what you want to do. So who's your archer?